So I'd like to welcome you to this session of Tuesday Talks. We have two more that I hope you'll come for next
Three
week.
more. You're getting a signal.
Three more, okay. Three more of which I know about two. Next week is a triple threat where Reverend Kathleen, Nirup, and Pratik are dealing with the question, what's in a name? So please tune in next week. So, excuse me, almost exactly 2 years ago, in the early days of the pandemic, we had a similar series of talks. And in that talk, David Bovet told us why we couldn't find toilet paper on the supermarket shelves. And for many of us, that was our introduction to the idea of the supply chain. Now, since then, it's become, I think, one of the most familiar words. David knew about it long before we did. He's been a consultant specializing in supply chain issues for more than 40 years. He's written a book on supply chain management, and he currently is working with partners and New Harbor consultants still on supply chain issues, no doubt, solving the difficult problems with the companies that he works for. So today, I hope David will explain to us both what's going on with supply chain now, and I don't know how we should look at it, how a problem can be solved, but I look forward to hearing. So David, take it away.
Thanks, Don. Let me see, is that, oh, here we go. All righty, can you all see the opening slide? Hopefully. Good, all right. Well, thank you so much, Don, for that kind introduction. I'm happy to chat a little bit this afternoon about supply chain. And it just is so amazing to me that in all these years of working on supply chain issues, it just never dawned on me that the phrase supply chain, the words would be virtually on the front page of the newspaper every day. I don't think 10% of the population had ever heard of the term until recent years, and now it seems to be everywhere. But let me kind of bring you up to date a little bit and also share a story from some hands-on work that we did fairly recently. Okay. Well, the situation has evolved, but it's a little bit same old, same old. And in the upper left, as Don mentioned, 2 years ago, we were talking about toilet paper, and there wasn't any in the Stop and Shop in Lexington in April of that year. We talked about the problems of people stockpiling, hoarding, if you will, toilet paper, so on and so forth. But there's always been something ever since, I would say. You all probably remember when this very large container ship got stuck across the Suez Canal. How improbable is that back in March of last year, and stopped a good share of world shipping for a week or 10 days. In the upper right, there's a picture of the traffic jam at the nation's ports. Yeah, this is in Long Beach or Los Angeles, a huge pileup of ships, sort of gridlock on that front. And down on the lower right, we've come full circle. Now it's Girl Scout cookies that are not to be found in certain parts of the country. So you tell me, which is worse, toilet paper out or Girl Scout cookies? I'd say it's close. If you can't get Thin Mints, that's not good. So it just continues, and just on a serious note, I'll say I haven't really turned to the Ukraine crisis and what all that may mean on the supply chain, but we might want to chat about that in the discussion. So supply chain is to blame for just about everything, and kids have also figured this out. So now even the supply chain is blamed for kids not getting their homework done because the homework is stuck on a ship. So that's the kind of situation that we've come to here, trauma all around. So I will step back just a little bit and talk about what do we mean by the supply chain. And just to say, in the context of where we've been during the pandemic, it all starts with the consumer. It's all demand based. And what happened, as we know in our country at least, is huge amounts of money were air freighted, if you will, parachuted onto households all around the country. And this was done very quickly, very efficiently in order to support the economy. And as people were very much stuck at home during this pandemic, they weren't going to the office, they weren't going to movies or traveling or going to restaurants, and they had this influx of money, they began to think about how to spend that money. So I don't know how many of us are in this boat, but certainly, gee, maybe it's time for a new sofa in the living room. Maybe I'll get some outdoor equipment like a bike that I can ride solo, or some exercise equipment, a little home office perhaps, or some patio furniture. This is the sort of thinking that went on. So there was some quite strong demand, and we'll share some figures in a moment. Well, of course, where does all this come from? It generally comes from a factory or a farm. So here we've just shown a factory, and that's what we call supply. So we've got demand going one way, and we've got supply coming the other way. In between, there are many steps. So this looks simple, but it's complex. There are factories, and as we know, many of those factories these days are in Asia, perhaps in China or in other countries, that has to get from the factory to a port, has to go on a container ship generally. It's going to go then by truck, by rail, into warehouses in the United States, and it might even go through two tiers of warehouses, one belonging to the manufacturer and another belonging to the retailer. Then it's trucked out to the homeowner. Of course, with e-commerce rising very sharply, particularly during the pandemic, a lot of this is home delivery to get things as quickly as possible to people's houses. So it is complex. On top of that, there's a whole layer of information tying all these steps together. As you can imagine, there are many players in the broad supply chain, and each is trying to do their thing in the most effective and efficient way possible. But the reality is there needs to be a lot of coordination across the supply chain for demand to be met smoothly by supply. So it all looks pretty straightforward. So how did things get so messed up? Well, step number one is demand just went through the roof. So it may be a little hard to see, but we've got 5 years of data here on US consumer goods expenditures. It's in current dollars, so you have to subtract a little bit of inflation. But overall, what this is showing is that over 24 months, from the 1st of January 2020 to January of this year, spending on goods by Americans is up 29%. So that is a very large increase. And you see the dip during the first few months of the pandemic, and then right away, starting in April of 2020, it just starts to shoot up, and it hasn't really stopped. It's still climbing. Below, I show a chart of services, and services are up too, but where we are today, January of this year, looks sort of like the continuation of the trend that we were on before the pandemic hit. So it is up a bit, but 6% compared to 29%. It's clear that the demand for goods, for stuff, for things is just has been extremely strong, and that's at the base of the problems. Now, the other side to this is that supply is low. This is a ratio that we use in economics and in business. It measures the value of inventory, all of the inventory that retailers have in the country, whether it's in a warehouse or it's on the store shelves, at that point in time, divided by the sales during that month. So it's a curve. And if you go, this goes all the way back to 1992, there were some years where that ratio came down. In other words, less inventory per dollar of sales. And that was a good thing. That was the efficiency of just-in-time fulfillment and so on, trying to lean out the inventories and so on. But what's really striking is if we compare where we are today and have been in recent months to the situation in 2017, 2018, 2019, the level of inventory in the system is way, way down. So from where we were at a ratio of about 1.5, we've come down to 1.1 or less. That's a drop of 29% in the amount, if you will, of goods that retailers have. So I did see in prints a month or two ago, President Biden said, gee, the in-stock ratio in stores hasn't really come down too much. Used to be 91%, now it's 89%. Yeah, okay, maybe so, but I would say the amount of inventory in the system is way, way down, and it isn't getting better at any rapid clip here. So that's the situation. Huge demand growth, and it's just the system has struggled to keep up at every level, as we'll see in a moment with one of these examples. I wanted to mention as well labor challenges. You know, all this stuff is driven by people. There are people at every step of the way in this supply chain, no matter where it begins. And I just wanted to call out in the transportation field, trucking on the left is the company P&S Transportation based in Birmingham, Alabama, that we've done some work with over the years. Great guys, very well treated, good company. But the reality is in the trucking industry in the United States today, the average age is 48 and the annual turnover is almost 100%. So that means, and this is for large trucking companies in the United States. So every month, something like 8% of all the truck drivers are quitting for one reason or another, or they're being fired. So that means at the end of a year, you've basically got a whole new set of truck drivers, all of whom have to be hired, trained, et cetera. They're reasonably well paid, not great maybe, though many of them can earn $100,000 a year, but it's a very, very tough life. A, you get no exercise, they're sitting in a seat all day long. B, it's stressful, as we can all imagine, driving on highways all day long. And probably the worst is you're away from your family oftentimes all week long. So it's a terrible job, I mean, honestly. And to me, the sooner we could introduce self-driving trucks safely, the better, because it's not a fun job. On the other hand, don't forget there are people who run the ports in this country, and they're also very important. Shipping has become very centralized in a few large ports on the west coast of the United States. There's one union for all of the longshoremen, the ILWU. For that union on the West Coast, the average age of those folks is 51 years old. And as recently as a month ago, in January of this year, 10% of that labor force was out with Omicron, with the latest COVID variant. So that does not help the productivity of the United States ports, even though they're very well paid. They at least make some good money. Well, fortunately, there are some transportation modes that have seen these challenges and have come up with some innovative new solutions. And I'd like to present one of the younger pilots for Delta Airlines. My granddaughter, Helen, age 11, was recently spotted on a Delta flight out of Atlanta. So there is some perhaps ray of hope inside here. Okay. So I want to turn to a story that myself and my colleagues who are on this call, Tom and Dave, we lived during the pandemic. We had done some work over the summer of 2020 for a large and growing consumer goods company. First, just asked to do some consulting over the summer. What could we do better? The CEO was not happy with how things were going on the supply chain side, et cetera. We came up with various good ideas and so on. Long story short, the CEO decided to fire the chief supply chain officer. A couple of weeks later, I got the call, and he was a very nice guy. The CEO was like, "Oh, David, you guys kind of step in here on a brief basis and help us out, because we want to recruit the really right person to take this job on. And it might take 2 months or something like that. But we don't know exactly how long." So I consulted with my colleagues, and we decided, yes, we would do that. Not a normal assignment for us, but we thought we would give it a try. So these folks, I just want to be a little careful, but they make a consumer durable product. You could think of outdoor furniture or something like that, which has been in very, very strong demand during the pandemic. I was in this position supported by my colleagues from the 1st of October 2020 to the end of March 2021. And just to give you an example, in a supply chain organization, there are different functions. In this case, I had these 7 direct reports. So sourcing, that means everything to do with finding new suppliers of all the different products that a company sells, and the relationships with those suppliers as well, which is very important in a time like this, not only to ensure that you get good prices, but to ensure that you have supply at all. I mean, that becomes also very important. In this case, this company, the products are primarily manufactured in Asia by other people. So they don't own the plants, but have worked for some years in general for what we call contract manufacturers. So manufacturers who are two Chinese in this case, and also 1 Vietnamese factory were producing these products for us. And the company had a good-sized team based in Shanghai, 30 or 40 people in Shanghai. The next box over on the right is supply-demand planning. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of work around planning all this. What's the demand forecast? What does Walmart say they're going to buy from us over the next few months? What's Amazon telling us? Costco, et cetera, et cetera. And on the other hand, how's production coming in the factories and where are things hung up, et cetera. So that's a planning function, very important. And on the right, then logistics, which would be management of warehouses, trucking, ships in Asia, in the United States, and connecting the two. In this company, there is also some manufacturing of consumable items that are, I would characterize as low value to weight ratio. So they're not that valuable and they're kind of heavy. So it makes sense in a case like that to manufacture in the United States. And we had 7, I think, mills around the country producing these items as well. Quality, had a young woman, very thin staff, though there were a number of quality inspectors in Asia working for the company, but we had a young engineer who was looking after quality concerns, and then another woman who managed the launch of products. There's a whole product development team thinking up the new products, but then this person is in charge of, okay, we're going to launch on X date, and how are we going to be sure that we have enough to supply, et cetera. So these are some of the functions, the areas that I say the colleagues that we had in this role was the chief financial officer, the head of sales, the chief HR woman, and product development was separate, and then the CEO was above. So that's kind of the landscape of the sort of organization that typically runs a supply chain for a company. This is a very fast-growing company, and I can only say a lot of these people, to me, look pretty young. So on the other hand, maybe I'm getting old. That could be the flip side, but a lot of them were young, full of energy, good folks to work with. And I would also mention, I've still not met in person a single one of these people. So it's all been done by Zoom and by Teams calls. So to step back just one step with regard to this type of product, which is, as I said, a consumer durable. Consumer durables went through an even more dramatic, if that's possible, drop and then upswing. And this is at the origin of some of the troubles that they did have, because they took just in 2 months, from February of 2020 to April of 2020, demand went down by almost a fourth. And as soon as management saw that, they were like, oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. So immediately get on the phone, tell the suppliers, stop everything. So tell the buyers, cancel every order you can or stretch it way out. We might go bankrupt. This could be very, very serious, and we really have to address this right away. So they did cancel a bunch of orders, only to find out a month or two later, oh, that's not what's happening. Demand is climbing dramatically. Where is all the stuff? Everybody wants these things. What are we going to do? So that's the sort of picture that we saw over the summer, inventory levels were very low. A lot of products were stocked out, couldn't be supplied to the retailers or to consumers over the website, et cetera, as demand just skyrocketed. And the time frame that we were working with them was from, as I said, fall of 2020 through spring of 2021. The curve had just sort of straight up. So, and demand growth continues today. So that's sort of the underlying situation, I'd say, that we found ourselves in. Now, my supply chain, some of these are photographs. The one on the upper left, that's one of the factories in China, part of the assembly line. The port of Yantian, you guys maybe never ever heard of, but it's a very large port in the southern part of China, not too far, let's say, from Hong Kong. I just kept hearing about, oh my God, the port is all backed up. This was just before Chinese New Year, so it was early February. So I said to one of the women in the Shanghai office, I said, send me a picture. I want to see. So Ruby sent me this picture. It's dated in the corner. It was on Chinese television. It's dated February 5th of 2021. And on the lower right, those are all the taillights of trucks that are just absolutely in gridlock. They can't get to the container berths, the terminals, which are with all those lights on at night in the distance. And the whole thing is just jammed up. Everybody's trying to get their freight out the door before Chinese New Year happens, and everybody goes home to their villages and the factories shut down. So that type of thing was pretty challenging. On the lower left, this is taken offshore Los Angeles and Long Beach. In the normal times, to have one container ship at anchor off a port like Los Angeles or Long Beach was shocking. You'd be like, what? That's very unusual. Well, for the past year now, there have been many days where there have been 100 ships, container ships at anchor. So it's incredible. I was in California in the fall and looked out the airplane window. And there's a lot of ships there. It got so bad in California this past fall that the auxiliary engines from all these ships at anchor were degrading the air quality in Southern California, just all this stuff blowing ashore. So the port authorities said, okay, we're gonna have a new system. We're gonna assign each ship a slot at the berth as soon as they finish loading and depart from the Asian port. And so they stretched everything out. So now it's a good solution, but the ships are now steaming very slowly across the Pacific, which is good. They burn less fuel, which is good for the environment, as well as good for the ship owners, which don't need any help right now, but it does help them reduce their costs. So all these ships, this supply chain is just plodding slowly across the ocean. And then when it gets close to their time at the berth, then they go into shore. I wanted to explain the picture on the lower right. For this company, we did have some freight coming in over Los Angeles, Long Beach, but most of the freight came into either Seattle on the northwest coast or through the port of Savannah. And there's a rail line that runs from Savannah to Atlanta, where we had our warehousing. It's a 250-mile rail line, and it's a very efficient way to move freight in containers from the port to the distribution center. So every day we're checking, where are those containers? Did they reach? Oh yes, they came in. Okay, they're in Savannah. Well, did they get off the rail head at Atlanta so we can truck them over? And one of those, well, there's been a problem. You're like, what kind of problem is that? Well, there was a derailment of the train and a bunch of containers fell overboard into the mud. And when this particular container arrived at the distribution center, this is what we found. So it was discouraging because we were short of inventory and we wanted every single unit that we could get. They had to comb through this and figure out what could be repackaged and what had to be tossed. At the top, I show you, I'm not filling it in, but basically just like that earlier simplified drawing I showed you, one of the things we found was the need to communicate more and to coordinate better. And just simple things like I held a weekly meeting with all the senior people in the company, and we just broke it down. We said, okay, on the left, we're gonna look at production. How are we doing? And we had a red, yellow, green stoplight system underneath this, looking at each of the product families, each of the factories, each of the consumer consumables that went with the product. So the first area was the components, and just to mention this. This product actually has computer chips in it as well. Well, you know what happened to computer chips? They all went south, and it caused auto factories to shut down during this period. And at first, it caused some problems for us because the more advanced products had these chips, and we weren't able to manufacture them for some weeks. So, question, well, where's the product? We're like, well, we're working on it, but we don't have the chips. So components, then the quality we're getting out of the factories, and the capacity, are we up against capacity limits at the factory level, which could be labor. For example, as you know, in China, they took a different approach to COVID. If they found 1 or 2 cases in a giant city, they'd put everybody in the whole city on quarantine. So I mean, that could wreak serious havoc with the factories. And then the whole transportation piece, what's happening at the Asia ports, like this picture of Yantian. What about the ships? What about the US ports? And then when it gets to the port, it was very difficult to get it into the warehouse. All kinds of various problems and delays, and at times dozens of loaded containers were sitting in the yard. We just didn't have enough labor in the warehouse because they were out sick with COVID, or we didn't have the space. Which I'll come back to. One of my colleagues, my colleagues did some work on that. But you know, labor or space could be problems. Do we have the inventory? How's the outbound processes working? And then the freight out. So it just we went through this every week with the senior leadership of the company, and we set up calls every day to coordinate with people, because it just was quite challenging. So overall, you know, I would say it was fun. It was intense, but it was fun, and things went pretty well. We were able over those 6 months to double the volume of shipments per month, which was something I don't think any of us thought we would be able to achieve when we first started. I would have to say the percentage of on-time and complete orders that were shipped, it did not really improve very much over those 6 months. But the new guy, fellow Jim, who replaced me, he's done very well. And in the past year, they have really brought that up, and they've been able to really largely solve the problem. We did solve the warranty parts problem. There's a woman, not in supply chain, but in another area, in charge of customer experience, the VP of customer experience. She called me up late one night. I'm just getting these totally irate emails from consumers, and they're like, you know, you promised me that I would get that part. You know, my product isn't working. You promised me I'd get it 3 weeks ago. Then I heard I was going to get it a week ago. I still don't have it. What kind of company are you running? What's going on? And then the CEO started getting these emails too. So she said, David, you got to do something. And she just, so we did. You know, we set up the coordination and so on, and also a new facility actually to be totally specialized in parts replenishment, and we did eliminate that problem. But it took months to do that. I think one of the things we're proud of too is that with the team there at the company worked out a real plan for global manufacturing, because I think many companies in the US and elsewhere in the world are going through that type of reflection today. What's the story? Should we have all our eggs in the China baskets or not? So that's something we worked on. And as I said, the methods were kind of pretty basic. Lots of calls, lots of planning of capacity at different links in the chain, improvements, mentoring people, which was a lot of fun, and hiring some good people. I just leave you with this little picture of company folks on the left. That's our one US guy, and all the China staff, and then on the right, one of the new manufacturers that we lined up in China. All good folks working hard. So, well, it's not over yet. Last week, this was the scene at the Super Stop and Shop in Bedford. If you want wet cat food, we can talk about why, but the picture is not good. So how much progress did we make in 2 years? I don't know, not much. Just a word for you all who have children, grandchildren, whatever. It's a great field. It is just fascinating. It's growing fast. Here's a picture of a new $6 billion Ford electric vehicle plant that is in the planning stages in Tennessee. to be supplied by another $6 billion electric battery plant, which would be in Kentucky. So very, very interesting. All big companies have supply chain professionals. The folks are in great demand at the moment, whether it's a biotech in Boston, Apple. I just want to mention Tim Cook, the head of Apple, is a supply chain guy. So not everybody knows that. He's not a product guru like Steve Jobs. He's a supply chain professional, and I interviewed him 20 years ago for my book. He's a very practical supply chain guy. So all big companies have these functions, and even local companies, iRobot and Uber in there. And one I'd like to just flag, Love Pop, an amazing greeting card company with a couple hundred people now in Boston. And these cards, which are fabulous, Maureen is one of their largest customers, are made with very precision cutting machinery in Vietnam and shipped over here. Very interesting company. Lots of new technology on the left. There's lots of software now to sort of manage and have visibility across the whole supply chain. In the middle, of course, robots. And on the right, just like to flag the world's first electric container ship. This is in Norway, and it doesn't go very far. It goes 30 miles and then it plugs in at night, but still, that's a pretty cool piece of technology. And there's lots of schools that give degrees, obviously our own MIT in our neck of the woods, and a shout out, my colleagues went to Cornell and they have a good operations research program. So lots of, just you know, it's a great field, just many interesting jobs to be had. And to me, it's just so fun, so interesting. You know, it encompasses, it helps you reach, I would say, people and activities all around the world, whether it's in factories in Asia or it's coffee pickers or tea pickers. There's a pilot in one of the ports in the lower left. On the right, some photos I've taken in different factories. The upper right is a cleaning products factory in California. In the middle is what we call a door mill, where they make doors for houses, offices and hotels and so on. That's, I think, in the hills of Virginia. And down towards the lower right, my colleague Dave and I went into a warehouse in California not long ago, and they were having a big calisthenic program going on on the floor there in the warehouse. So lots of exciting stuff, and that's my talk. So welcome any comments or questions. Let me stop the screen share. Oh, and there I am on one of these factory tours, which are just always so interesting. Thanks.
So thank you so much, David, and thank you for demystifying the lack of wet cat food, which I discovered at Demula's this week. So if people who would like to ask questions or make comments, please use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, which has a raise hand feature. And if you click that button, we will know that your hand is raised. So Dave Pollock, looks like you came in first.
Okay. Dave, I was interested about your take on the future of just-in-time. I mean, it does seem to be vulnerable and have reliability problems when you have unusual circumstances, which I think we can classify the last 2 years as rather unusual. Is the idea to have, and for defense purposes as well, to do more manufacturing in the US? What other kind of things are being considered to, I guess, strengthen or deal with the vulnerabilities of just-in-time?
Yeah, great question, Dave. And just-in-time has been a very good thing in many ways. It's efficient. It takes cost out of the system. One of the reasons why inflation has not been so strong in the last years in this country is because we've been able to tap into lower wage rates and very good performing factories in places like China, frankly. So, but it's always a balance. Everything can go too far, and now it's swinging in a way from just in time to more like just in case, or gee, let's get as much inventory together as we can so we don't stock out. But to your broader point, there is certainly a sea change underway at the moment. I just saw last week the government came out with a Buy American plan to try and ease supply chain problems. how quickly and effectively can that really make a difference is a fair question. But many companies, as I mentioned, have been considering what to do. So for some companies, getting out of China is an important objective. For others, it's to just get closer to the markets. So try to get out of Asia in general, for instance. And then the question is, are you going to go to Mexico, for instance, or potentially in the United States? So it depends. You know, we do have a lot of automation, a lot of robotics in factories these days, and so that can counter the wage differential, and the wages have also been rising in China. But it's going to be a big effort, and I guess I only see the latest horrible news from Ukraine as being another motivator for many companies and countries to think long and hard about, wow, you know, can we become less dependent? But as the cat food example shows, even when the source is domestic, as it was for toilet paper, there could still be supply chain problems.
Thank you.
Good question.
Meg?
Wow, David. First of all, you absolutely captivated me, and I never thought supply chain would. And also you just answered two of my questions. One was about your position on restricting globalization, and one was about Ukraine, although you might have something more to say about Ukraine. I don't know.
Yes. Well, personally, I find the situation there terrible from a human perspective, and I'm just not clear what, if anything, can really be done to prevent a very, very powerful military country right on their border from doing whatever they want. Right. Second, in terms of the importance of Russia and Ukraine, you know, in a sort of supply chain or economic sense, the exports of Russia, of course, of interest and importance are oil and gas and coal. So it's all energy related and grain, particularly from Ukraine. So it's quite likely that grain prices will go up. It probably won't impact us in this country as much as it will people in some other countries like the Middle East who depend on Ukrainian grain exports. But you know, where it all goes, where this leads is just unknown. It just is unknown. I mean, this could, I don't want to speculate, but it could have grave consequences if escalated into a broader standoff between Russia, potentially China, and Europe and the United States. I mean, it's just incredible. And if nothing else, it of course is making all companies think about even more. We just thought we were coming out of the pandemic, the case loads are going down. Okay, it's kind of back to normal. And now this happens. You're like, well, not good.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was looking at the news headlines just before this session. I guess this is more a question of logistics than supply chain, but the headline was that the Russian offensive on Kiev was stopped 30 miles away because they've run out of fuel. So,
well, I hope that's true. The other thing I read, though, was that Americans don't travel that much over Russian airspace. And right at the moment, actually, we have not restricted American airspace from Russian aircraft. But Europe has taken very strong steps, and never mind the people traveling between Europe and Asia, freight also travels by airplane. So there's lots of freighters and there's lots of air freight. So that's going to have an impact on certain products as well, that they'll have to go around Russia, which adds distance to the trip. Maersk, the largest container shipping company in the world, based in Copenhagen, just announced they're not going to go to Russia anymore. So it's you know, it could. I don't know. I hope it won't, but I mean, there's a potential for further escalation, I suppose. And of course, Putin has been laying the groundwork for many years to try to insulate himself and the Russian economy as best they can. And they have made a lot of progress in that direction. So it's worrying.
John Schmitz. Unmute yourself.
Right, okay.
Yeah, David, you pointed out that a lot of the supply chain issues, or at least some of them, are labor force related in the ports and truck drivers. I've read one place that the US really needs 80,000 more truck drivers in order to be up to snuff. What some of the promises are for automating these jobs, automated trucks, and probably automated ports too. But I don't know what progress has been made toward doing that.
Yeah, it's a good question, John. A lot of venture capital and other investment has gone into that whole area, of course, and there's some very interesting companies out there. Convoy is one that I've come across, but there are many who are working on this problem. So they have made headway in terms of the ability to potentially have a self-driving truck, or maybe to put trucks in a convoy, and perhaps there's a driver in the first truck, but not the other trucks. But it isn't yet really running widely at all. And they've also been running trials of autonomous delivery vehicles, for instance, and even drones to deliver certain types of things to people. So there's progress, but if you really wanted to do it right, in my mind, you would have dedicated travel lanes for these convoys of trucks, and that's a whole capital expenditure of road system and so on that would have to be done. So it's a bit of a race. Are we going to get more truck drivers first, or are we going to get more technology first? And I fear that in between there's going to be some challenges as baby boomers really begin to get older, and many people just decide to retire. So,
Well, and sort of a follow-up question is, why is it so difficult to recruit truck drivers? They get paid pretty well, although it's kind of a crappy lifestyle, but they get paid very well. And so single guys who don't have established homes would seem like sort of perfect targets for these jobs. Or single, not just men, but women too.
And there are women drivers. I guess I'd say it is, it's not an attractive job in terms of, it's not like exciting, like you're I don't know, an airplane pilot or something, and you go to Brazil and have a nice weekend or something. You're sleeping in a truck stop. You're eating probably unhealthy food and so on. So the turnover is just extremely high. What I did find working with a flatbed truck operator down south was their preferred employee was not a young single person. It was a person of color, number one, was their preference, who was a family person, typically a man, but whatever. Family values, did want to get home on weekends, but steady, reliable, dependable. The risks are high. Well, we just saw a tractor trailer jackknife off in Weston, I think it was a couple nights ago, and fall into a river. I mean, these are big rigs, and we know that when we're trying to pass one of them on the highway. Like, boy, I hope that person. And the government did put in hours of service regulations, much stricter a few years back. So now the trucks are all equipped with electronic logging devices so that the drivers can't cheat on their hours, and they're very strictly held to not driving more than a certain number of hours every day, or a certain number of hours in every week. So there's a lot of safety regs that have had some impact too.
But that cuts the income also.
It cuts the income, yes. And the general pay is either cents per mile, or it's a percent of the revenue from the load. That's usually how they're paid. And one of the things we found with the flatbed loads, which haul a lot of pipe, for instance, for the fracking in North Dakota, from the Texas up, if the cargo isn't ready, the driver has to sit with his rig potentially for hours while it's his turn to load, let's say, or unload. He's not earning money while he's sitting there waiting in his cab, which is not good. So there's a lot of elements of the industry that are very poorly paid for the work that's done in my opinion. Dray as well, from the ports of LA and LB into the warehouses and the railheads and so on is also terrible. The waiting is just horrible, and the drivers really aren't paid for that time. So it's
Along the general lines, there's been a fair amount of press lately about Amazon warehouse workers and their attempts to unionize and their complaints about we have to work crazy hard and it's and we get fired at the drop of a hat and stuff. So warehouse workers are in the same category, I guess, as truckers and dock workers.
Yes, yeah, very true, John. It's quite interesting with Amazon. It is in the whole transportation and warehousing industry. There's been a lot of push. Maybe this is a little bit of a sideline, but the question of whether a delivery driver is an employee or an independent contractor is kind of along those same lines. We were involved in supporting the state of Massachusetts a few years back to try to reclassify delivery drivers as employees and get the benefits, but didn't succeed. But in terms of Amazon, I did read that they're gonna have another go at the unionization in one of the warehouses. I forget if it was in Alabama or where. Now, many companies are raising their wages for these folks quite dramatically. It was in the paper very recently that they have to. I mean, that's what is happening. But it's a tough job. On the other hand, there's some very, not going to solve everything, but there was a great robotics firm in Woburn, a spinoff from MIT, which a few years ago had developed some very cool robots to move things around inside the warehouse and bring the work to operators who would stand in one place as opposed to having to walk all around. Amazon, however, saw that and they bought them. So that was maybe 10 years back. But there's others. This Boston area is a hotbed of robotic development. Another company called Six River Logistics is also got robots there in Waltham. So warehouses are adding equipment to help do some of the most onerous work. But it's hard work. My general take is that most companies treat their warehouse associates, as they call them, well, and they treat them well because they need to, because it's a disaster if they all quit or they all get sick or they strain their backs or whatever. So good operators pay a lot of attention to their employees, and there are many good operators, whether they're I can't speak to Amazon specifically, but warehouses that we've been in, we've often been impressed at the rapport between the managers, the supervisors, and the workers. So
Okay,
it's
good.
tough, though.
David Horton, you've been waiting for a while.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, David. By the way, David, talking about warehouses, I just saw, I got an email from Minuteman High School. They've just gotten a grant from the state to teach about warehousing and automated warehouses. I don't know if you've seen that, or I can send it to you just if you might be curious.
I'm very interested. Thanks.
Also for the undergraduates, but also people who are out in the working fields who are coming into Minuteman Institute, they can also enroll in that course. I'll send it to you. But my question was just whether the supply chain, how it works in so-called in reverse, if you wish. If I were a Chinese businessman, what would I say about the supply chain and perhaps my relationship with the United States? I don't mean in politics at all, strictly just how do the products that I would like to have or the materials that I have, are they getting to China or other places too? I think you've talked more about coming in, but I just wondered about going out. Thank you.
Oh, good question, Dave. Well, if you look at U.S. imports and exports, we tend to import all kinds of consumer goods, mostly from China, increasingly from Vietnam. There's a lot of volume from Vietnam growing very fast. What we export from this country is not as impressive. Okay, aircraft from Boeing, but other than that, a lot of what we export is bulk products like grain, scrap metal, used to be scrap paper, but now Asian countries don't want that stuff anymore. So we aren't really exporting in general a lot of great things to other countries. That's a broad statement, but it is partly true. But it has been very interesting to deal with Chinese companies where we wanted certain things. We wanted the commitments that they would have the capacity, for instance, to help us in coming months. Of course, their pushback there is, well, you give us the commitment. We want to know, are these firm orders? You're not going to cancel them going forward. And of course, what they want is to, they're very good business people. And they're like, well, we would like to be your only supplier. Why don't you drop your other guys and just work with us? Or why don't we do a joint venture and we'll build a new factory? I know we know you don't think our factory is so great. Why don't you put some money at stake? And oh, don't you know this other European company has done that with us, and you could do the same. So it's business. I'm not very experienced in dealing with China, but what I've seen seemed to be very squared away, and of course a lot of hardworking people there. And we have to say one of the impacts of this crazy trade situation is the lifting out of poverty and into a massive middle class of many, many millions of Chinese. So I see Bob Quall's hand up.
Hey,
there.
Bob.
Yes, David, I just wondering in the situation we're in with the trucking industry, is it opportunity to go back to moving more things by rail, which for the long haul, of course, is a lower cost, more efficient. Obviously, rails don't go everywhere, but it seems to me that it's too bad that we've gone to so much trucking that we're now as we are now. And does it make sense to go back?
Absolutely, great question, Bob. Involving containers, we call that intermodal rail. So the containers go on flat cars, if you will. And if you're in the middle of the country, you can see these mile-long trains stacked with containers too high. They call that double stacked. Just tons and tons of containers moving by rail, particularly from West Coast ports into places like Chicago, into Texas, and even as far as Atlanta. So it's a very efficient means of transportation. And the interesting thing in transportation is lower cost also equates to less greenhouse gas and less pollution in general. So it's a good thing all around. Intermodal freight, moving containers on rail has just skyrocketed in the last 20, 30 years. Now, when I looked at the statistics most recently, it's down a little bit. And I think what's happening is that inventories are so low that the retailers are like, okay, just get it off the ship in California, just put it on a truck, use team drivers, boom, send it as fast as you can because we're out of stock. And I just don't have time to deal with the rail. It is a little bit slower, though. Over the years, we've done some work for some of the big Class 1 railroads in which we showed that the reliability of delivery days in transit was actually very good by rail. And it's not nearly as bad as maybe the trucking companies might like you to believe. So yes, it's a great idea. We're currently working for a barge company on the inland rivers. And one of our views there is that barge is another less polluting, more efficient way of moving freight. And when you look at the reindustrialization of the Mid-South and the Midwest, there could well be some interesting opportunities there. So yeah, great point.
So we're coming up against our 5:30 cutoff time. David, do you have any final words of wisdom you want to share before we stop?
No, I just hope I've given you some thoughts and appreciate how interesting a field this is. Yes, it's stuff. Maybe we don't need all this stuff. That might be solution number one, but it's very interesting to think about where these things come from when you're next at Wilson Farms and you see which state or which country the various produce comes from. Just think about how did it get here and how many people were working on that to get those green beans to the store. Thank you so much. Really.
Thank you. And Meg, you get the final word, Meg. You're mute. You are mute.
You've mentioned several times sort of environmental factors. How much in the field in general is environmental, the situation, the dangers, the confusion that could erupt, erupt from climate catastrophe. How much of that is going into the thinking and planning about, and it could affect localization as well as opposed to globalization. I just wondered how much that thinking is entering into decision making.
Yes, a lot, I would say. And some of the leaders in the field in terms of putting pressure on companies to think about these things might be a bit unexpected. We wouldn't be surprised to know that IKEA, for instance, is very keen on environmental sustainability, but Walmart has been a big driver in this whole area. Big companies like Nike as well, who've really worked with their suppliers, say, hey, we sell the stuff at retail, but we realize there's a very long supply chain behind it. What are you doing? What are you doing about it, et cetera? And the different modes of transportation have also made some progress in ocean shipping. There's been rules passed to forbid the worst types of fuel, high sulfur fuel, from being burned within a couple hundred miles of the coast of different countries. But there's a lot of pressure on the ocean shipping industry right now to do more. And they've said, oh yes, we're going to go carbon neutral. The little ship design school I went to is just in the process of standing up a sustainability center to try to focus on issues of more sustainable ship design and operation in the context of the entire supply chain. Because one of the problems is the fuels for these ships. I mean, they do burn very nasty bunker fuel, but they're at sea for thousands of miles at a stretch. So solutions need to be found to address that. I personally wish that the US government would do more. I wish we would move to a carbon tax, and hopefully some of these things will happen. The industry is aware. On the other hand, the truckers are going to defend their position, and it's business as usual in a lot of ways. But there is a great consciousness, and there are some very interesting approaches. Europe, I would say, is ahead of us in that regard, using tricycles to deliver stuff in city centers and all kinds of cool things. So,
thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope to see you next week for What's in a Name. Enjoy your evening.
Thanks, David.
Thanks all. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.